Hey everyone, welcome to Fiveable. This is an AP government stream for a review of public policy and social policy. So before we get started, if you could, or if you want to, you can answer the poll in the chat. Just about Super Tuesday, I know this specific stream isn't necessarily about Super Tuesday, the election process, or the path to nomination to be president. However, all of this kind of ties in together in terms of whoever the next president is, regardless of if it's a Democrat that's currently running or if it's President Trump. They're all going to be dealing with public policy, social policy, and economic policy. So, you can just answer it in the poll or answer the poll. Feel free throughout the stream if you'd like to ask questions in the chat, collaborate with each other if you don't know anything. If you have a question during the stream, if you could ask it, like on the bottom, like in the tab at the bottom where it says ask a question, put your question there because I get notified. If you put a question there, if you put it in the chat, I might not always see it. So just make sure you put any of your questions there. Additionally, I just want to let you know this one's going to be probably on the shorter side just because social policy is just a really small part of the whole like AP government unit. Social policies is like one little topic. It's like 4.10, and then 4.11 deals with economic policy, which will be streamed next week. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'll try to get you guys out of here around 30 minutes. At the end, we'll do a little bit of a Super Tuesday update and just talk about the path to the Democratic nomination, just because, again, it is related to AP government. Before we begin, I wanted to highlight some of our other subjects and some of those stream schedules. This slide, if you'd like, I'll wait for like a few seconds while I'm talking. If you want to take a picture of this, this is the weekly stream schedule along with all of the subjects. So as you can see today, Tuesdays, AP Human Geography, Psychology, and Gov are all streaming. Tomorrow on Wednesday, it's all of our science classes. So specifically tomorrow, APES and AP Bio are streaming. Normally we also have AP Chem and AP Physics streams. And then on Thursday, all of our history streams. So world history, European history, and US history. Mondays, tune in for our special AP Gov current events updates. That's always something we do. Myself, Fatima, and Brandon, we're in charge of that. So we do it on like a rotational basis. It's kind of trying to tie in the social studies units and the English units, and it's a collaboration between government and Lang. So please check that out on Mondays. As always, make sure to follow Fiveable on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. If you don't know already, all of our resources are now free. So replays, all of the study guides that are going to be published next week, everything is going to be free. So Fiveable is a really great resource. Personally, it has helped me in my AP classes, so I know it can help you in yours as well. If you have any questions about Fiveable in general, AP Gov, anything, feel free to leave them in the chat. So a little bit about me. I'm a junior from North Carolina. I took AP Gov as a sophomore last year, and I really love politics. I got a 5 on the exam, and I really like teaching about politics and just keeping up to date with current events. I'm really excited to stream for Fiveable. So let's go ahead and get started. One last little thing about our schedule, and then I promise we'll get into the stream. Next week, Tuesday, March 10th, we are doing the second part of this stream, which is economic policy. The following week, a review of the 14th Amendment. Then we start getting into more of our review units. So the 24th, come back for Supreme Court comparison essay help. So that's your FRQ number 3. And then finally, March 31st, to round out the month, we have a stream on iron triangles and issue networks. I would definitely recommend attending that one. That's probably one of the most confusing topics in AP Gov, and I think you would really benefit from coming to that stream. All right, so throughout this stream, we're going to be talking a little bit about social policy. So let's go ahead and start out with social welfare. So there are 2 main types of social welfare programs. The first type is entitlement programs. So entitlement programs are government benefits that qualified individuals are entitled to by law. So if you need help remembering like that term, just remember like entitled, entitlement program, so like that word. Basically, you have to meet some sort of qualification in order to qualify for these entitlement programs. They are not for everyone. Key examples of these are Social Security and Medicare. So we're going to talk a little bit more later about the differences between Medicare and Medicaid. just kind of like a disclaimer, I don't want to discount any of this stuff that I'm going to be talking about today, but what I think you should know mainly about social and economic policy is a policy making process that we're going to talk about closer to the end of the stream. The little details such as like what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, stuff like that. It's not something that you will need to know on it's highly unlikely that you'll be asked like what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. It's just good to know these things so that if you have an FRQ about policy, it's really easy to pull in examples. So it's not to discount anything that I'm going to be talking about today, but I'm just letting you know, like if you don't understand every single topic that I'm going to talk about, it is okay, because public policy is a small part of that test. While you should know it, knowing specific, like very specific examples is good, but it's not necessary. Okay, so knowing them will help you, but I just want to let you know that if you don't understand anything, I know policy is super confusing. It is for me too. You always feel free to ask a question in the chat, but that's just kind of like a disclaimer. So we talked about entitlement programs. The other type of social welfare program is a means-tested program. So means-tested programs are government programs that are only available to individuals below the poverty line. So one way that you can remember this is like means, like you have to have a means of doing something, or another way you can think about it is like mean is like the average, so you have to be like below the average in order to qualify for a means tested program. Again, the difference between entitlement and means tested is that entitlement is available to more people, even people that might not necessarily be in poverty. So people that are retired, people that maybe have disabilities, those people and the benefits they get would normally be classified under the entitlement programs. Means tested programs are specifically for individuals that fall below the poverty line. Examples of means tested programs are TANF, so temporary assistance to needy families, and Medicaid. So again, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about the differences between Medicare and Medicaid later in the stream. But yeah, so does anyone have any questions about the difference between entitlement and means tested? Yes? All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is income distribution. So we talked a little bit with the means tested programs on the poverty line. So what we've seen as America has developed, especially within the past 10 to 20 years, is that along with increased polarization in like the political spectrum, that's something you can compare it to. There's also been like a huge variety or like a huge disparity in income distribution. So you have the rich making a lot more and the poor earning a lot less over time. So the share of the income distribution, literally like the definition, is a share of national income earned by various groups in the U.S. The poverty line, or what we talked about with the last thing with means tested programs, is what a family must spend for what's called like an austere standard of living. So this is kind of a standard of living that's like they're able to get by. So they're able to pay the bills, things like that. They're able to pay for food. But like that's kind of like they can afford the bare minimum is the way you can think about it. So if you are on the poverty line, basically you're just getting by from week to week. That's what you could think about with the austere standard of living. Below the poverty line, if you were not able to meet that bare minimum, that's when you would be qualified for those means tested programs we talked about. So in 2012, kind of an old statistic, around 8 years ago, the poverty line for a family of three was about $19,000. So if you think about like $19,000, that is not a lot at all. So like a family of four under the poverty line for they'd have to survive on $13 a day per person when taking into account rent. So think about a family of four. So 13 times 4 is $52. So you're thinking about $52 a person. So like buying like a loaf of bread, stuff like that, that can cost up to $4. If you're buying, stuff to go with that, and then like a toy, things like that. When like children are little, like diapers, like cream, stuff like that, toiletries, all of that contributes to like this $52 that a family can earn or can use per day once you take out the aspect of rent. So that's not a lot at all. So there has been, again, controversy, especially with the Democratic platform. The Democratic platform, what we'll see is that they tend to favor social welfare programs. So they agree with the government helping in like promoting social assistance. However, slowly over time, Democrats have started to support more help for people that are making lower and lower. that's kind of what causes a rift between Democrats and Republicans. You'll see with basically anything in government and politics, anything in this course, more government is Democrats. Liberals is the red, your Republicans and conservatives. So if you ever have like a question on the AP exam that you really don't remember if it's a Democratic ideology or a Republican ideology that best fits, just think about that simple theme. Lots of government, limited government, or like no government. No government, like no government assistance at all, which is they're basically like no taxes, literally no nothing, no government for anything. That's the libertarians. Okay. Limited federal government and more state government. So like you're kind of like dispersing those responsibilities of the federal government. You're giving those people at the local levels more more authority as to what to do with money, stuff like that. That would be conservatives and Republicans. And then Democrats and liberals, they tend to support more federal government involvement. So in things like social welfare, stuff like that. They believe in more federal government involvement in helping the poor, stuff like that, especially in terms of what we're talking about today. So the next thing we're going to talk about is shift back into entitlement programs. So the income distribution, that was kind of tied into those means tested programs that we talked about. So some entitlement programs, we discussed that Social Security was one of the main examples of an entitlement program. So Social Security is a form of monthly payment. And the beneficiary to Social, what to remember here is that Social Security is for the retired or the disabled. These are the two groups that benefit from Social Security. This is different from Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that, okay? So this is something that's definitely important to remember. The way that Social Security is funded is through payroll tax on employees and employers. So the way this works is that while you are working, so once you get into the workforce and you start working, you have to, a part of your monthly salary or your monthly check, there's a deduction in that's called payroll tax. So you are paying payroll tax. That payroll tax goes into like this big pot of Social Security, okay? And that's how when you get older, you're benefiting now from the people that are working at that time. So while you're working, you're contributing to that big pot of Social Security, and the people that are old at that time, retired or disabled, they're able to take that money and use it for their purposes. When you get old and you're retired, the people in the workforce then are able to pay that Social Security. So one thing we'll see again on a future slide, I believe, is that the workforce is aging, first of all, and additionally, America is aging. It's called the graying of America, and Social Security is running out. So at this point, people are unsure about whether we should have Social Security. So that's something that you'll see, especially in debates that are focused on economics. That's something that's a popular topic, even in current presidential debates. So I encourage you to pay attention to that the next time you are watching a debate. So the next entitlement program we're going to talk about is beneficiaries for this are the same as those beneficiaries from Social Security. So they are retired and disabled. And the funding for this, again, same as Social Security, comes from payroll tax on employees and employers. So far with the entitlement programs, where does the funding for Social Security and Medicare come from? So feel free to just drop that in the chat. Where does that funding for Social Security and Medicare come from? Medicare Part A, at least. Yes, payroll tax. And who is contributing that payroll tax? People that are retired or people that are still in the workforce? Yes, good job, Sandra and Dakota. So contributing through payroll tax, and the people that are retired and disabled are able to get that money. The next part of Medicare is Medicare Part B. This is a volunteer. So basically, it's the same group of people that are like that are benefiting from this. However, the funding for this does not come from payroll tax. This comes from the beneficiaries themselves, and they must pay premiums. What this is like once you get old and like let's say you need insurance, this is a way in which you are guaranteed insurance if you are on Medicare Part B. Okay, so people that are 65 and older or are disabled, and again, they benefit from that Social Security we talked about earlier, they are able to get that insurance. However, they must pay premium. So it's just like other insurance companies, okay? So now that we've talked a little bit about entitlement programs, the next thing we're going to talk about is means tested programs, okay? So Medicare. So what do you know about or Medicaid, I'm sorry. What do you already know about Medicaid? Or what have you heard about Medicaid? If you want to answer that in the chat. If you don't know anything, it's completely fine. All right, so Medicaid, yes, old people, yes. That is a good comment, because a lot of these things that we think about in terms of Medicaid, Medicare, any of it, normally if you think about the people that are benefiting from this, it's old, retired, disabled, and the sick, people that are single parents, things like that. So people that are somehow disadvantaged in a certain way, those are the people that are benefiting from those means tested and the entitlement programs. So with Medicaid, that is a form of medical and hospital aid, and the beneficiaries here are the very poor. So in terms of old people doesn't really apply to Medicaid specifically, but remember how we talked about means tested programs? Those people that qualify for means tested programs are those that fall below the poverty line. So that's what you can, if you can think about which ones are the means tested programs, that'll help you remember who the beneficiaries are. So since Medicaid is a means tested program, the people that it's available to are the very poor, okay? So with Medicaid, it's like basically it's helping you with your hospital bills and medical bills. And the beneficiaries, since it's beneficiaries themselves because they are already poor, the funding comes from federal grants to state health programs. So this is something that kind of goes from the federal government to the states. Okay, so kind of a little bit of a deviation here. What do you guys know already about grants? What is a block grant? Does anyone know? Has anyone gotten to this unit yet about policy? Are any of you in the policy unit with AP Gov? I just want to like get a gauge, because I know with our, like when I was personally taking AP Gov, we did not get to policy until like late April, like right before the AP exam. Yes, yes, and yes. When a state gets a bunch of money and when money is given by the government for broad reasons. Yes, this is super important with a block grant, okay? A block grant is basically when the central government gives a huge block of money. They like, just think about it that way. They take a huge block of money, they give it to the states, and they're like, you can do whatever you want with it, okay? So they don't care about the reasons for which they're being used. So do you think states like block grants or do they not like block grants? Yes, they love them because they are able to do whatever they want with them, right? Now, what's the other type of grant? We talked about block grants. What are the other type, or what is the other type of grant? Okay, so the other type of grant is a categorical grant. Okay, so you can think about it like a category. A categorical grant is basically when the federal government gives a state money and they're like, okay, you have to spend it on this. So they give them the money under the condition that they spend the money for this reason. So if it's an education, a categorical grant for education, the state must spend that money on education. Otherwise, categorical grant kind of really ties in with all of this policy stuff. A lot of times you'll see with policy, especially things like Medicaid, they just refer to these terms with grants like block grant and categorical grant. Yes, a mandate is very similar to that in terms of a categorical grant. There are slight differences in terms of what like the actual purpose is at the end. However, yes, a mandate is more like a categorical grant than it is a block grant. Okay, so one thing that you'll see is that a mandate is like literally an order that is imposed upon them. So like, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that was a mandate, okay? So it requires the states to do these things. A categorical grant, normally it's more like money related. A categorical grant, you can tie into money a lot easier than you can a mandate. A mandate, if you think about it, it won't always like, you won't think about it. It is still money. Like a mandate does still involve money. However, like when you think about it, you might be like, well, that doesn't seem like has anything to do with money. So like the Americans with Disabilities Act basically required all states to make all public facilities accessible to those that are disabled. have to do with money. Normally with categorical grants, if they reference a categorical grant, it's a lot easier to see that, like, okay, that is definitely money because they will like talk about money. However, it's like, I don't know, you could go different ways with it, okay? Does that make sense, Dakota? All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about with means tested programs are food stamps. Okay, so food stamps, the official name for that is SNAP. They're coupons that can be used to buy food. The beneficiaries for these are people whose income falls below a certain level. Okay, so again, like that poverty line thing that we were talking about, if you fall under the poverty line, that's when you are entitled to means tested programs. The funding for this just generally comes from federal revenue. So you're taking federal government money in order to qualify or in order to supplement like your food stamps and stuff like that. Okay, so the last or one of the last means tested programs that we're going to talk about that should say temporary assistance for needy families. Okay, so before I publish this PowerPoint, I will make sure to fix that. However, TANF is temporary assistance by the states and partly by the federal government. And it is literally temporary assistance. Okay, it is not for an extended period of time, as in permanent assistance, such as some of these other ones. This is like literally like temporary assistance until that needy family can kind of get back on their feet. So the people that can benefit from this are like that kind of varies state by state. So it's families with children. That's like the policy in some states. In other states, it's one parent families where the breadwinner is unemployed. In other states, it's like both parents have to be unemployed. So it just depends in terms of who can qualify for TANF. That's something that, again, these are like tiny details that you'll probably not be required to know. However, you should know that TANF is temporary assistance and it is not permanent assistance. Again, like I said before, it's part state and part federal. So like both governments work with each other. Okay, so what is a term for the state government and the federal government working with each other? Yes, federalism. So federalism is a theme you'll see with social policy, economic policy, literally anything AP Gov related, you can see federalism in it. Okay, so federalism is a key topic and a key theme in AP government. So make sure you're able to come up with a ton of different examples for federalism, whether that be through policy or through lawmaking, anything like that. Okay, federalism is truly a key aspect of how our government works, and federalism is responsible for divisions between political parties too. If you think about, like I said before, Democrats favor a larger federal government and less power to the states, whereas Republicans favor a lesser federal government but more power to the states. All of these things really go back to those roots of federalism. So it's something you should really be familiar with. Okay, so the future of Social Security and Medicare. So that's something I talked about earlier. But Social Security is running out of money. So there's several plans to improve Social Security's financial future. People have addressed it through their political campaigns, stuff like that. People say that we could cut benefits, we could raise the retirement age, and raise tax rates. So with those bottom two things, why would raising the retirement age help Social Security not run out of money as quick? Like, why raise the retirement age? What does that have to do with Social Security? Anyone know? Yes, less people would qualify for it. And yes, more people in the workforce at any time. So let's say, I believe the retirement age right now is like 65. Okay, so everyone from probably like 25 to 65 is working. If we make that age 25 to 70, now if you think about it, there's more people in the workforce. So 65 to 70, technically they're still in the workforce. They're not retired. Remember, Social Security is only accessible to you if you are already retired. So therefore, there are more people in the workforce at any time. Another thing you can think about is that not everyone lives from like past like 65. So 65 is like the current age. At like 69, 70, like there's more people, there's more people living at 65 than there are at 66 and then at 67, things like that. So all of those things technically would help Social Security stay for a longer period of time. Okay, the other thing, raising tax rates or raising payroll tax, the percent of payroll tax, how would that help improve Social Security's financial future? So we talked about the A's, so that's more in terms of after the fact. What about raising the payroll tax? Or raising a percentage of payroll tax? Yes, more money. So there's going to be more people contributing to the, or more money being contributed while people are in the workforce. So that, again, helps extend Social Security's future. Okay. So now we're just going to talk a little bit more about some key legislation. So this stream is kind of, I know, a little bit all over the place, but these pieces of legislation can be used as examples in your free response questions if you need to. However, there are still, like, by taking an AP Government and Politics class, these are all things that you might hear like in real life being referenced. So it's really important to know these things. So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, basically what it said was that lesser funded schools would receive adequate resources, and it was favored by state governments. So this meant that it gave more discretion to state and local government on how to spend allocated money. So like we talked about with the block grants, those give states more authority. States tend to like that because then they can personalize it for their own use. However, the federal government doesn't really like that because then it can't be kept uniform throughout. But this is an example of a key act that was passed. With the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, however, later came the No Child Left Behind Act. What this was that states have to adopt some kind of education accountability standards. So basically, this is like making sure that teachers are doing are performing to what the government wanted them to be, that students are performing and growing from year to year. So like from the beginning of 8th grade to the end of 8th grade, students are growing, things like that. Okay. The No Child Left Behind Act required that there was annual testing for students. So if you just love testing, you can thank the No Child Left Behind Act. That's something that was required by this piece of legislation. And it also said that highly qualified, like quote unquote, highly qualified teachers were necessary, and that sanctions on schools, that there would be sanctions on schools that don't meet that progress. Okay. So in terms of this did generate a lot of controversy at the time. It was accepted by some people that believed that testing and stuff like that was necessary in order to promote state accountability. However, it did not, a lot of people did not favor it because it meant there was more testing, and it kind of punished teachers if they didn't grow their students as much as they should. So like these sanctions that were put on schools, like sometimes that meant like getting rid of teachers that maybe didn't grow their students. However, like schools that are in high poverty, let's say for example, a student enters the 5th grade at a 1st grade reading level. If that 5th grade teacher is able to grow the student from a 1st grade reading level to a 3rd grade reading level, they still might not pass their 5th grade reading exam. However, they obviously grew during that class. However, the teacher is not really marked or praised for that through this act because technically, I guess, they didn't get them up to that 5th grade reading level. However, they managed to get the student up from 2 grade levels up from 1st to 3rd. So that's why this act did kind of generate some controversy. What came after this was the Every Student Succeeds Act. So it replaced the No Child Left Behind Act. It left some of the parts of that first act in place. However, it gave states more freedom. It kept protections for disadvantaged students. However, it said that the states can either adopt the federal government's or the federal standards, so nationwide standards with Common Core, if you've heard of that. I know my state personally, I live in North Carolina, so we were on Common Core, I believe, when I was in middle school. Then I think we switched back to North Carolina standards by the time I got into high school. So different states did that differently. I believe some states are still on Common Core. It just depends by state. Additionally, it said that the Department of Education, in that sense, the federal Department of Education has to approve state plans. So they have to, the states, if they're developing their own standards, they have to submit a plan to the federal government so that the federal government can kind of check the boxes and make sure that every state is meeting the accountability standards that they still want them to meet, if that makes sense. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on anything we've talked about so far? So like I said before, it is okay if you don't know these pieces of legislation in detail, complete detail, that is completely fine. However, if you have any major questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is ideology. So the main thing that the College Board curriculum emphasizes within the AP Government thing, or AP Government standards for social policy really is all about ideology. So all it really talks about is these next few slides. So the previous slides really are the slides that provide context. Really, I think these are the ones that should provide context. Those be the main material. Either way, it's fine. With healthcare, so Democrats versus Republicans. Again, like I said before, always think about Democrats being pro federal government and Republicans being pro state government. So with Democrats, they push for more healthcare funding in terms of Medicare, children's health insurance programs. Additionally, they tend to favor programs that ensure all Americans have quality and affordable healthcare. So 100% federal government funded. Again, remember, these are all enhancing the power of the federal government. In terms of the Republicans, they believe that the healthcare should work within the free market system where competition will lower the cost of healthcare and there's no federal government involvement. Again, this means that the federal government is taking like a hands-off approach, and therefore that's why it kind of aligns with that Republican ideology, if you need help remembering that. Okay, so we got through healthcare. The next thing is Social Security. With Social Security, Democrats believe that Social Security is a fundamental right of Americans and believe that that the best way to protect Social Security is to maintain federal government control of it and not privatize it. However, Republicans feel that privatizing is the way to go, and they believe that citizens will be able to place portions of money that would have gone into Social Security into other types of accounts. So they basically feel that we shouldn't be required to pay into Social Security at all times, and that we could put portions of our money that would have gone into Social Security somewhere else. Okay, so again, hands-on with Democrats in terms of the federal government versus a little bit more hands-off with Republicans. With education, okay, the Democratic position is, again, expanding federal control over education, no vouchers for private or homeschooling. They believe Democrats generally tend to support public education. They also, again, these are generalizations, so I'm not saying every Democrat believes this or every Republican believes this, or I'm not promoting one over the other. Just remember that, please. I'm just saying that this is kind of like the general overview that you should get. So Democrats tend to support no prayer in schools and a more multilingual and multicultural education. On the other hand, Republicans believe that federal influence should be reduced in education and that more control and more options should be given to the parents, teachers, and local school boards. So they agree for vouchers for private or homeschooling, and they believe that voluntary school prayer should be allowed. So does anyone know the case where voluntary school prayer was like outlawed or said, or the court said that that was unconstitutional? It's one of your 15 required Supreme Court cases. So the case was, that's okay. The case was Engel versus Vitale. So Engel versus Vitale was the case. I can spell it out. It's kind of, I don't know, spelled weird, but Engel versus Vitale was the case where that where they basically said school prayer was unconstitutional because the Establishment Clause says that the federal government can't like endorse or establish a federal religion, and because it was happening in a public school, that was outlawed. Additionally, Republicans, or it fits more within the Republican ideology that English be established as a national language, where Democrats believe in a more multilingual education. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about are just some points, and again, these are actually directly from College Board about ideology and what to remember with ideology. So liberal ideologies tend to think that the personal privacy extends further, except in terms of religious and educational freedom. Again, conservative ideologies favor less government involvement to ensure social and economic equality. So this is like they don't really care for like TANF or SNAP, things like that, that help people that are below the poverty line, because that's more federal government involvement. Additionally, libertarians do not favor any government or intervention beyond like protecting private property or individual liberty. So they basically say no government for anything other than you are protecting my freedoms. Okay, so that's just something to remember with libertarians, is that there are no government. So remember how I said at the beginning, like one thing that you should definitely know with policy, if there's one thing you should know, it's the policy-making process. Okay, so the policy-making process has 5 steps: agenda setting, policy formulation, policy adoption, policy implementation, and policy evaluation. I would recommend that you either take a picture of this or look up the policymaking process. I'm not going to go into like detail in terms of what each one is, just because there is another stream about that. However, I would make sure that you do know this policymaking process so that you can use that as evidence. So if anyone wants to take a picture of it, or just make sure you look up the 5 steps to policymaking, it's pretty uniform throughout. If you like put in AP Gov right after it, you'll get a bunch of infographics. So I'd make sure you check that out. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is Super Tuesday. So even though this has nothing to do with social policy, like I said before, it is really important that we talk about Super Tuesday because it is such a significant part of the nomination process. So as of 8:30 p.m., so like this stream started at 9 p.m. Eastern, so I'm on the East Coast. I updated this last around 8:30. I don't know if any more states have come in. However, so far, Joe Biden has won Alabama, North Carolina, and Virginia. Bernie Sanders has won his home state of Vermont, and Michael Bloomberg has picked up his first win with the territory of American Samoa. So basically, at this point today, 1,300 delegates were up for grabs today with Super Tuesday in all. The Bloomberg camp, Bloomberg has spent literally like $500 million in advertising. He skipped a lot of those early states. Yes, Biden is doing good tonight. Bloomberg skipped a lot of those early states. However, he put in a ton of money, like literally so much money into advertising. Like I think, like American Samoa, obviously, like, that's not going to make or break the nomination, but he even put in money there for advertising. But yeah, he really isn't doing as well as people expected. The reason why a lot of people feel that Michael Bloomberg entered the race was because Joe Biden was not expected, based on early performance, to do super great at this point. So people felt that by this point, Joe Biden might even be like out of the race, and like Bernie Sanders would be taking like all of these southern states too. However, Joe Biden is doing way better than expected after his performance in South Carolina. So yesterday we talked about it in the okay, yeah, he should endorse Biden. That's what a lot of people are saying. That's what's going to happen tomorrow. The Bloomberg camp says he's going to reassess tomorrow morning. This, like, even earlier this afternoon, he was saying that he's definitely in it for the long run, and he'd go into a contested convention, which a lot of Democrats were criticizing. However, Bernie Sanders had said that I don't want the support of any billionaires. Like, I don't want that support. So it's expected that he would endorse Biden at this point if he drops out of the race. However, we'll have to see tomorrow morning. Joe Biden's camp, like even from the beginning, what they were saying is we're like, wait for South Carolina. Like, we're going to do good in South Carolina. The main reason for this is that Joe Biden is popular among African-American voters. And he got a key endorsement from a person in South Carolina, and that really propelled him. And that momentum is kind of going through with him to this point. He won my state of North Carolina today, Alabama, Virginia. Bernie Sanders did win his home state of Vermont. Bernie Sanders, his camp says that he's going to do better in the West. So obviously, West Coast states, those results come out after us, or after the East Coast. So by the time like the West Coast gets those results, I believe it's like, it'll be like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night here on the East Coast. So yes, is Bernie still is leading in your state of Texas. Okay, so again, so Texas and California are super crucial for either candidate, whether it be, or for any candidate, really, Biden, Sanders, Bloomberg, Warren, anyone. At this point, like whoever wins California is going to get a big boost because of how many delegates are available there. You need like 1,900 something delegates in order to win the nomination, which we'll see on the next slide. And right now, at least as of 8:30, Biden was leading, but it really wasn't by much, because if Sanders wins like one big state, he would easily take over the lead from Biden. So right now, it's kind of become a two-person race in terms of Biden and Sanders. However, there was we'll see tomorrow, I guess, what happens in terms of the delegate count. We'll see on this next slide.